Okay, I think we're going to start. People will be coming in after this time, I know, but at least I want to begin the process. So this is the third workshop in the scientific communication workshop series. And what you need to know is we have one more next week on Tuesday, and that's going to be really about communicating research to everyone. Um, uh, Diverse audiences, but we had to just change the title in order to make it a little more easy to digest for some people. So that's our last one in this series. And next week, we also have Dr. Peter Elkin, who is going to be in the Responsible Conduct of Research workshop on Monday. It's talking about data safety. And then there's one more in that one as well in that particular series. So I also want to tell you that we are going to be putting a survey in the chat at the end of the presentation, kind of towards the middle and at the end. Please make sure that you complete that. I'll also be sending it out 2 other times. We do use that to report to our sources, our funding sources, but Diane definitely, and I definitely get together and we amend the series based on your comments. So we really take that to heart. So we're really interested in that as well. I also want to talk about the fact that there's a micro-credential associated with scientific communication if you're interested. And it's okay if you haven't started yet because the timeline is up to you. I'm very flexible with that, and I can send you information on that if you'd like. I'm going to be placing in the chat a few things. One is our link to our workshop series at the CTSI Workforce Development Corps. Another is my email address in case you're interested in the micro-credential. And just that you're going to type your comments in chat, and I'm going to present them to Dr. Ophir at the end. And thank you very much for coming. I know more people will be coming soon, and I'm going to pass it over to our lead in this particular workshop group, and that would be Diane Schwartz. Diane, over to you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, on this beautiful sunny afternoon. We're just pretending that the sun is captivating us and encapsulating us in warmth, but it's very cold outside, so it's good to be indoors. It's really a pleasure to welcome Dr. Ophir to our series. We've been doing this for many years now, actually, ever since I joined the Department of Biomedical Informatics. This is, I think, going on to our 8th or 9th year. I've lost track. But Dr. Ophir brings a special and unique set of qualifications. As his title says, he's been studying misinformation for decades, thousands and thousands of times. He's worked on very important findings regarding how misinformation finds its way into our knowledge base. But he also looks at media effects, the influence of persuasion, conspiracy theories, and a variety of other kinds of approaches to help us understand the pervasion of misinformation in our culture today. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to Dr. Yotam Ophir, and welcome to our very special series. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Okay, we have a lot to talk about, so I'll just jump right in. Also, it's April Fool's Day, so everything I'm going to tell you today is going to be wrong, misinformed, and deceptive, I guess. The title of this talk is Misinformation in Society, 5 lessons I've learned from studying thousands of years of misinformation. This title by itself is a bit misleading because I'm basically trying to include here the most important kind of, let's say, conclusions that I came with from my upcoming book, Misinformation Society, which will be out, I think, the beginning of June. They are proofing like the last couple of lines there, and then it should be out. So to say 5 lessons is a kind of underplaying the amount of stuff I'm going to throw at you in the next 45 minutes or so. And maybe what we should have called this talk was something like 5 lessons I've learned from studying thousands of years of misinformation that I can reasonably squeeze into 45-minute presentation. But let's discuss more during the Q&A. And if you still want to know more, my book will be out very soon. All right. So can you see the slides? I'm not absolutely sure.
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, excellent. So I want to take you back to that awful pandemic. And I think one thing that everybody can agree on is that we were not ready for this one. The sickness and death were everywhere, but the disease harmed individuals in a disproportionate way, basically making those vulnerable and disadvantaged suffer even more than the rest of them. The scale of the disease was so big that the public reacted with surprise at first, and then horror, and then anxiety. There was a lot of uncertainty because people need accurate and timely information at times of crisis, but we often don't have the answers right away. And maybe because of all of these, there was a very high degree of distrust in experts and in the officials handling and kind of trying to cope with the crisis. Quite immediately, conspiracy theories began to flourish. Some people argued that the elites were causing the disease on purpose, maybe trying to depopulate Earth. Some people thought that maybe the disease was the result of some out of control technology. Some thought the disease was not even real, that the whole thing was just a hoax. And maybe the whole thing was kind of planned to kind of gain a stronger control over the population. Another thing that happened, and maybe should not have surprised anyone, is that people began to offer all kind of snake oil solutions, all kind of quackery that was not really effective against the disease, but helped some people to get rich at the expense of those who were anxious and concerned about it. At the worst of cases, the epidemic even led to the eruption of riots and violence. Often the violence was kind of channeled against minority groups that were scapegoated for the disease itself. And at sometimes even the medical staff that were responsible for helping us get through this mess were attacked themselves in their treatment facilities. Perhaps the most disappointing fact about this epidemic is that even after scientists were able to understand the causes of the epidemic, misinformation about it persisted for a long time. Now, if you're following my points here, you obviously know that I'm talking about the cholera of 1854 that struck London by surprise at a time of great social and technological changes. People were extremely anxious, looking for answers, and often hinging to misinformation and conspiracy theories. And the reason that people fell for misinformation during the cholera outbreak was that they just didn't understand the disease. They didn't have the tools, the knowledge needed to make sense of this unprecedented crisis. At the time, the most kind of reasonable or common explanation that people had for diseases was that either God decided to punish us for our sins with a disease, or a more kind of scientific idea was that the disease was caused by bad, kind of foul air, a theory that is known as miasma theory. Now, the first kind of idea that the disease was caused by God is not a scientific theory. I mean, it may be true, but there is no scientific way to tell. The second theory was actually scientific. It was wrong, but it was scientific, because if the disease was spreading because of bad air, then you should assume that people who breathe the same air will have the same levels of infection, right? But in a very impressive kind of effort, a guy named John Snow, not that John Snow, different one, went house to house in London and kind of tried to estimate how many cases were associated with each household. He realized pretty quickly that people living in proximity did not have the same levels of infection, meaning that the air could not be the cause of the disease. Instead, what he realized eventually is that there was a pump in the middle of Broad Street that was contaminated, mostly with feces and dead bodies and other things like that, that used to be in the Thames River at the time. And people drinking from the same pump got the disease in similar rates. Once they cleaned up the pump and replaced it, cholera was over. Um, People were pretty optimistic after that. Jon Snow himself said that the time will arrive eventually when great outbreaks of cholera will be things of the past, and it is the knowledge of the way in which the disease is propagated which will cause them to disappear. So basically, Jon Snow himself, the guy who realized what the real cause was saying to us, it's just a matter of time until we understand diseases to a level that will allow us to never suffer from them again. If it sounds very naive to you, I just want to remind you that even in 1967, the US Surgeon General said something very similar. He said, it is time for us to close the book on infectious diseases. The idea was that now that we have knowledge, now that we are no longer misinformed about viruses, about how infection works, we can finally put an end to humans' long and quite awful history with infectious diseases. Now, obviously, this prediction was way too optimistic, as people realized very quickly afterwards with the AIDS epidemic that was based on tons of misinformation, and later on the Ebola epidemic, and most recently during COVID. So, two conclusions immediately jump to mind. The first is that knowing more doesn't seem to be enough to not make terrible decisions. And the second conclusion that I think is kind of valid here is that misinformation is not a new phenomenon. But to accept that misinformation is not new is not the same as saying that everything remained exactly the same way and that nothing has changed. But it is to say that before COVID, people spread misinformation about other diseases. And before they did it on the internet with AI and social media, they did it in other ways. I'll show you a couple in a second. But we do see that COVID-19 and our contemporary moment are characterized by faster and wider and deeper information environment, one where a lie or a falsehood can spread to millions of people almost immediately, sometimes created by sophisticated machines that can kind of create a perfect lie that fits our needs, our psychology, our demographics, and so on. The other thing that changed is that the United States of today, as I'm assuming that you can experience yourself, is significantly more polarized when it comes to science than pretty much any time before. Now, it's not that people did not disagree about science before, but it didn't fall so cleanly into political party lines. So I promised you 5 lessons. Lesson number 1 is nothing is new, and yet somehow nothing is the same either. Now, this is actually kind of the starting point of my book because a lot of people before me and after me have argued that we now live in a post-truth era. To say that humans live in a post-truth era, meaning that we can no longer agree on facts or talk to one another in a reasonable, rational way, is to imply that back in the day we lived in a truth era. So why did so many smart people, academics and journalists and educators and politicians, why did all of them decide that we moved to this new era in human history? Well, the answer was mostly one of two or a combination of the two. The first is Donald Trump and his surprising election in 2016. And the second is the explosion of the internet and particularly social media. Now, it's true that we had social media before 2016. I remember using MySpace, I don't know, 2007 or 6. But social media as we know it today, Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and so on, kind of grew into the powerhouses that they are. Around 2013, 14, we began to understand how strong these tools are, basically after the Arab Spring demonstrations. So if you read the books, and there are a lot of them out there, you'll see that people keep pointing to 2016 as the Rubicon of sorts that you need to cross from the age of reason to the age of post-truth. The problem with that argument that 2016 was very unique is that we had misinformation before. Before 2016, where a lot of scholars began worrying about Donald Trump or Brexit in Europe, scholars were still very concerned about misinformation coming from presidents, be it George W. Bush during the Iraq War or Nixon and LBJ during the Vietnam War. And I can go back in time all the way to George Washington and show you how each president spread some falsehoods, at least some more than others. But the concern only grew, let's say, in the early 2000s with George W. Bush. Now, a lot of people today are freaking out about something like QAnon, and I would argue that for a good reason. The idea that there is a bunch of pedophiles that run Hollywood and Washington who trade kids while drinking their blood so they can stay young forever and all kind of stuff like that, and Donald Trump will somehow save us from them, is wild. But those of us who are slightly older remember that in the 90s, Americans freaked out about satanistic educators who are abusing our children in daycares and in schools. And if you go a little further back in time, of course, there was a big worry that women in general, definitely the witches, were abusing kids, including in sexual ways. And if you go even further, you'll find the same arguments made against Jews, most famously the blood libel kind of archetype, going back to the 14th century. Similarly, these days you'll hear a lot of people being worried about conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement. That's the idea that was behind the mass shooting here in Buffalo, but also in the Pittsburgh synagogue and in New Zealand and other places. The idea that non-white people are kind of overtaking the country and that liberals and feminists and Jews and globalists or whatever are helping them do that. But many, many years before we had the Great Replacement, people like Samuel Morse, yes, the guy from the tapping on something to send messages, believed that the Irish were trying to replace Protestants in America with Catholic immigrants. So old wine, new bottle, I guess. But again, it doesn't mean that nothing has changed. Most importantly, I think the information environment, and I'm a communication scholar, so that's kind of my perspective too. I think the information environment has changed a lot. Let me show you how we used to spread misinformation about 3,000 years ago. It looked something like this. So when the Pharaoh tried to lie to his people about being able to capture the city of Kadesh, this is 1274 BC, he paid someone to draw a picture on one of the castle's walls to show the success and victory in battle of his army. That was false. He didn't win that war. But remember that to see that story, to learn about those alleged victories, people had to actually visit this building. That also meant that if there was an earthquake and the palace would crumble down, that narrative will go away with it. So quite limited. In other cases, people spread lies on stuff like coins. So you could like mint an argument against your opponent on coins. But as you can guess, this will be limited too. We got better at spreading visual misinformation over time. And if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, we began to use more advanced techniques to kind of rewrite history and lie to our own and other people. One of the experts in using visuals for misinformation was the Soviet Union and Stalin specifically, who, as you can see two pictures here. The original one is on the left, and the one that Stalin wanted citizens to actually see is on the right. And you can see that one of his political opponents was basically removed from the images, the official images of the Soviet Union. They did it by hand. So they used airbrushing and all kind of stuff like that. Obviously, no computers, no Photoshop or whatsoever. By the late 80s and early 90s, we already did have Photoshop, which allowed Time magazine, for example, to make the skin of O.J. Simpson look darker. Arguably because they thought that he looks more scary when he's darker. I can only assume they thought it would be more dramatic. So now we lied with computers and kind of advanced techniques. We still use Photoshop today. Here is, for example, an image that the Iranian government released. You see on the left, 4 missiles in a training, flying at the same time, very impressive. Except for in the original picture here, you see that one of the missiles just failed to launch. No problem. They fixed it in Photoshop. They added a 4th missile. And now it seems like they did a great job in that training. Having said that, 2016 did introduce us to some new ways to communicate very, very quickly, very effectively, not only to a lot of people, but also to the specific people that you want to persuade. And one way to think about it is that our walls are much more effective now. They are not depending on you traveling to Giza or wherever. And also, they are much, much, much faster at spreading those messages. More recently, by which I mean the last couple of years, we began to see a rise in AI kind of generated misinformation. This is a real photo. Well, it's a real photo of a fake situation that the Trump campaign sent to voters in 2024. As you can see, Trump is very popular among black voters, except that this photo is completely fabricated. It was created by AI. Another thing that we kind of developed over the last year or so, I mean, we had it for a while, but it's getting much, much better now, is deep fakes. Basically, you take a video, you can replace the face of the person to make it seem as if someone else is talking. You can change all kind of things in the video to change the message, to replace the words coming out of the person. One example is a video of Nancy Pelosi where someone slowed the speech down so it sounds like she's intoxicated. Quite a lot of things we can do with AI and videos these days. A couple of quick examples. This video tried on the left. You see a fake video that tried to make it seem as if Biden, as president, was falling asleep while talking to the Israeli prime minister. He was not. And on the right, a video that shows Joe Biden constantly checking his watch during a 9/11 event, which make it look as if he was bored and just wanted to get out of there. Again, this was fake. If you want to see face swaps, I recommend videos showing how you can make Barack Obama basically say whatever you want. Another area where we suffer quite severely from deep fakes is what's known as deep porn. Basically, imagine that you want to take revenge on your girlfriend who dumped you. You create like a pornographic video with her face on it. Quite awful stuff that you can do with AI. In the last year or so, AI has improved in crazy, crazy ways. It kind of made a real jump in quality. Look at the pictures on the screen, for example. None of these people exist. All of them were created by AI. In fact, if you want to create your own person, you can go to the website. It's called thispersondoesnotexist.com. Every time you refresh the page, it creates a photo within millisecond. Now you see some issues like this guy has kind of glasses, but not really. But again, it gets so much better so fast. Case in point, even the photo I showed you before, I created in AI for the purpose of this talk, and it took me 1 second. All right, lesson number two. And this one hurts, I think, when I talk to students and others about it. We did not evolve to be accurate. We want to believe that we are rational, accurate people, but if you think about humans from an evolutionary point of view, you learn quickly that humans did not evolve to be truth seekers. There is a reason why we've been thinking about reality and truth for as long as we could communicate. I mean, famously, Plato argued that what we think is reality is just a bunch of shadows on the wall. In other cultures, Buddha was talking about the true truths and so on and so on. Across cultures, across time, people were very concerned about what's real and what's not. And the reason we've been obsessing with reality and deception for so long is that we are really not good at identifying the truth. We think that we are, but we're not. Now, why is that the case? Why are we inclined to kind of accept new information as true almost immediately without really criticizing it? Well, the answer has to do with our evolution. We have evolved not to seek the truth, but to understand the world in ways that helped us survive. Um, our genes don't really care about the truth. All they care about is to make sure that we, the hosts of those genes, stay alive for long enough so we can procreate and bring kids. Basically, once you bring kids, you can go from an evolutionary point of view, you're useless. So that means that we did not evolve to even see the world as is. There are very, very interesting theories these days by cognitive evolutionary biologists that argue that when I see a cup of coffee, I don't really see the full existence of that cup. For example, we know that we can't see some ultraviolet rays. We can't see other dimensions that may exist. What I do see is I see the cup in a way that allows me to understand that it has a beverage in it. And if I drink that beverage, I'm going to stay alive for longer. So we evolved in a way that allowed us to see fitness, not reality. I know it's a bit abstract and vague, so let me use a specific example, and I hope it will become clear. Think about our very, very impressive ability to identify patterns. Why are we so good at identifying patterns? Why, when we look at a bunch of numbers, we can very quickly identify the kind of mathematical equations that could create those numbers? Well, it had a really big advantage in the wild. If I look at something like this, let's say I wake up 5,000 years ago and I leave my cave, let's say 50,000 years ago for now, maybe 500,000 years ago before the agricultural revolution. I leave my cave, I look at the bushes and I see a pattern here. All of these I identify clearly and quickly as leaves. But then I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but at the center left here, there is a tiger. Can you see it? Humans have evolved to identify patterns and aberrations from patterns very, very quickly. Why? If you see that tiger, you need to identify it immediately. You need to turn away. You need to run for your life. If humans would have stopped and look at that bush and say, I don't know if it's really a tiger, or maybe Plato said it's just like shadows on the wall. I don't know, starting like contemplating, they're dead. Like 5 seconds later, the tiger eats them, they're dead. Humans have evolved to identify patterns, especially ones associated with threat that's going to kill our precious DNA, to turn away and to run. This is also why we have a tendency to accept new information as true even before thinking it over. But those same shortcuts that helped us identify tigers are now failing us. And they fail us for two reasons. One, in the wild, it was pretty hard to create a realistic looking tiger that was not really a tiger. Now, sure, some animals use deception and so on, but they didn't have something as sophisticated as Photoshop. The second reason our shortcuts fail us is that for prehistoric humans, being inaccurate was not a big deal. I mean, as long as you brought kids to the world, who cares if you know the truth about the universe or not? Humans of the older times did not have an impact on faraway people. They did not have an impact on the environment. They could not bring the whole universe or the whole Earth, sorry, to its demise through climate change. So, evolutionarily speaking, being wrong was not a big deal as long as you managed to procreate. And to procreate, you needed to know two things. What is dangerous, so you're not eating a blueberry that's poisonous, and what other people in my tribe think. Because if you disagree with your tribe, they're going to kick you out, they're going to shun you, you can't bring babies, the DNA is dead. So here is an example of how our tendency to identify patterns fail us today. Sorry, a lot of traumatic and kind of sad memories in this talk, but if you go back to 9/11, what you see, I'm assuming, I hope, is a terrorist attack against American targets, but some people see something very differently. They look at this photo and their pattern recognition system tells them, those towers look a lot like the number 11, don't they? And the terrorist attack took place on September 11. And wait, 11 is also the number of the Antichrist. Now that's interesting. And wait, if you look for more patterns, 21 years before the attack, George W. Bush, the father, gave a speech about the New World Order. Is that a coincidence? Well, we will say, obviously, yes, it is a coincidence. But some people begin to look for patterns. That's how our brain works. It looks for patterns, especially ones associated with threat. So they begin to look at the number 11. They begin to investigate the number 11. Some even go back to the Bible to look for the existence of words like towers and twins and see if you can decipher something from their locations. Again, this is our pattern recognition system failing us. Now, it can get even more absurd. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. If not, you're up for a treat. Here is a $20 bill. You've seen these before, right? Turn it over. You get something like this, right? Nothing much, but wait. Fold the $20 bill to look like an airplane. Remember, airplanes were crashing into the World Trade Center. And suddenly you get something that a lot of people argue, and by a lot, I mean a lot of people argue, looks like the tower's on fire. Can you see it? Like here is the right tower, here's the left, here's the smoke. It's even worse if you flip it over, it looks like the Pentagon on fire. You see here? Now, I'm assuming that you're going to say, that's a coincidence. There are a lot of weird coincidences in life, but quite a few people online believe that this is proof that 9/11 was an inside job. How do they know? Well, someone at the top of the Treasury Department was kind of putting these clues into bills so we could decipher the real culprit behind 9/11. Again, this is our intuition towards pattern runs amok. The problem with that is that there are quite a lot of things in life that coincidentally happen together or correlate in all kind of ways. For example, these are real graphs. The divorce rate in Maine, in the state of Maine, is almost perfectly correlated with the consumption of margarine. Now, we know that margarine is not good for us, although we thought it was good in the past, but it's hard to accept the idea that margarine is leading to divorce rates in the state of Maine specifically. Similarly, although they are almost perfectly correlated, most of you will agree that the number of letters in the winning word of the National Spelling Bee is not caused by the number of people killed by venomous spiders. So not everything that correlates actually causes one thing causes the other. Now, those examples are stupid, but let me bring it to reality by showing you this. What you see here is a correlation that looks very persuasive at first between the number of people diagnosed with autism and the number of people receiving an MMR vaccine. Those are years. You see here, this is when the UK began to use vaccines, the MMR vaccine, and then this is the autism rate in the UK. This is the autism rate in the US. And again, this is where MMR was first administered. It sure looks a lot as if the MMR vaccine caused the rise in autism. What those correlations don't show you is that at around the same time when we began to use the MMR vaccine, we also changed the way we diagnose autism. It's a complicated topic, but in short, what we used to think of as mental disability has become part of the broad spectrum of autism over the years. So you see here in this figure, basically, the number of cases of autism increases, the less intellectual disabilities we identify, cause all kind of situations that in the past we would identify as mental disability, we now understand are actually cases of autism. Again, our brain takes this correlation between the MMR vaccine and the diagnosis of autism as proof because we are so wired to accept patterns, especially scary ones. All right. So the point of lesson number 2 is basically you do not need to know the facts in order to allow your genes to survive. What you need is to avoid dangers, and you need to play nicely with your peers. If you don't play nicely with your peers, they're going to kill you. So in the past, if everybody in your tribe says the moon is God, and let's imagine that you look up to the moon and you say, that doesn't look like God, they're going to kill you. So your genes will die with you and you won't have kids. Those who said, sure, the moon is God are still with us and we are their kids. Those who said, I don't think the moon is God are basically dead. So you can see how complying with one's group was more important than being accurate, which brings me to lesson number 3. Misinformation is often associated with group identity, and these days, one's political identity is becoming increasingly important for the acceptance of science specifically. Well, the acceptance of a lot of stuff, but I will focus on science. Why science? I'm looking at science as a case study here because science allegedly should be about facts. Politics is not about facts, right? Politics is about morality and what you think is right and what's wrong. It's not clear if the freedom to carry a gun is more or less important than the freedom from gun violence. Those are two views that you can debate and discuss. But when it comes to climate change, for example, it's not so much about morality, it's about the facts. The world is warming up, and it is our fault. Humans are causing it. So 97% of scientists say that global warming is real and that humans are behind it, i.e. anthropogenic climate change. And it might surprise, the younger people in this Zoom meeting to know that until recently, both Republicans and Democrats agreed on that. It's true that even if you go, let's say, to the 80s, Ronald Reagan began to say some stuff that were not very accurate about environmentalism. But by and large, in the late 80s, both parties agree that climate change is real, that it's urgent, and that we can do it. We can find solutions. Here is George H.W., the father, saying, fighting global warming can be done and must be done in 1988. A lot of iceberg have melted into the river since then. And we now see climate change becoming one of the most politicized and polarizing topics in America. Why that's the case? Again, I can fill a whole lecture just on that, but in short, it seems that the idea that humans and human activity are causing climate change doesn't sit well with the idea of neoliberalism and deregulation. The idea behind neoliberalism is if you just let industries and companies do whatever they want, us, the citizens, will make sure that they do the right thing. So if they act in a way that's not great, we're going to punish them financially. That doesn't work. And as such, we let fossil fuel companies to do whatever they want for many years. And the result was that the world is warming up without us punishing them whatsoever. So since the reality of climate change became obvious in the 90s, think tanks, specifically conservative think tanks like the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, put millions upon millions of dollars into refuting and rejecting the science of climate change, sometimes by creating their own science that was completely biased, and sometimes by discrediting scientists, the international groups studying climate change, and so on. Another thing that these groups did was to give quite a lot of money to Republican politicians who in turn also tried to question the reality of climate change. Here is James Inhofe, Republican senator from Oklahoma, bringing a snowball to the Capitol building to prove to us that if there is a snowball outside, it must be cold, and therefore global warming is a hoax. Yes, it's ridiculous. Yes, he actually did it. He's not the only one. Fox News were happy to send their reporters to stand in the freezing weather outside of New York to kind of ask their audiences, what global warming? Look at that. It's October and it's freezing outside, so global warming must be a hoax. Obviously, they're confusing weather and climate here, and there are a lot of mistakes in this assumption. Take someone like Glenn Beck, used to be in Fox News, then conservative radio. He claimed that environmentalism was like a watermelon. It's green on the outside, but it's red on the inside. Basically, environmentalism is communism in disguise. So with all that political messaging coming from elites, think tanks, media, politicians, we've seen a tectonic shift really in the right's perceptions around climate change to the point where now about a quarter of the senators, obviously those from the Republican Party, are rejecting the science of climate change, or if you want it in a metaphor, they prioritize a reassuring lie over the inconvenient truth that Al Gore tried to warn us about. It's not just climate change, and I refer you to a really good book by journalist Chris Mooney about this topic. By the 2000s, we reached a place where journalists are declaring that we've entered the moment of the anti-science presidency. And I know who you're thinking of, and it's not him. That was actually said about George Bush with his attack on stem cell research and greenhouse gas studies. I'm running a little bit because I know we're slightly behind. 2015, out of all the candidates running for the Republican presidency, candidates for the presidency, only one kind of willing to say that evolution is real, with all the rest refusing to say so. By the 21st century, i.e. our time, we got to a point where science is completely part of the culture war between liberalism and progressivism. We saw it in COVID with two very different visions between right and left on how to handle the crisis, with how to, interact with experts. And eventually, it started from the top, this polarization, but in the 2010s, around the Tea Party, Sarah Palin, and so on, we begin to see the polarization of science entering voters' opinions, not just politicians, to the point where today, if liberals are putting a sign in their backyard saying that Black Lives Matters, women rights are human rights, no human is illegal, science is real, and love is love, basically, you see how science is now part of the liberal package. Republicans now have this version. In this house, we believe that Biden stole the election, Hillary belongs in prison, Epstein didn't kill himself, climate change is a hoax, again, science, Q, and all lives matter. The result is not just identity signaling, it's also behavior, with Republicans and conservatives refusing to vaccinate during COVID, refusing to vaccinate since COVID, so this is for the flu, and there is a massive increase now in the number of Republicans who believe that vaccines cause autism, again, against all scientific evidence. Okay, let me move a little bit just so we're not kind of ending our whole time. Lesson number 4 is very important, I think, too. Well, all the lessons are important, but I believe that the price of spreading falsehoods is in deep decline, and this is extremely dangerous for our democracy. Back in the day, extremists who used quite a lot of misinformation, like George Wallace, to promote their political needs, were held back by the parties. The parties were strong enough to choose candidates that did not, let's say, move too far away out of the consensus. But since we began using primaries, the primaries attract the more extreme forces in our parties, we see that parties are losing the ability to weed out extremist candidates. Same is true for misinformation. In the late 80s, George H.W. Bush promised us no new taxes, read my lips. Before doing exactly that, introducing new taxes, voters punished him for his deception, and he did not win in 1992. Obviously, Bill Clinton did. Similarly, we now talk a lot about Republicans rejecting the election results of 2020, but I want to remind you that in 2000, there were a bunch of Democrats who rejected the elections between Bush and Gore, specifically what happened in Florida back in the day. But the difference between 2000 and now is that, not Gore, Kerry, sorry. The difference is that the elites of the parties from the Democratic Party stepped forward and said there was no deception. The elections were legal, the elections were legitimate. These days, the parties are not capable of doing this function anymore, which means that ideas that used to be on the far right, on the extremist fringes of society, are now entering mainstream discourse. In my own work, which I'm not going to talk too much about, I studied the far right, the neo-Nazis and white supremacists quite a lot. One of their most iconic kind of narratives is that, again, liberals, feminists, Jews, homosexuals are trying to replace white Americans with non-white people. Those theories are very common in places like Stormfront. It's kind of like a Nazi version of Reddit, if you want. And you can read about all of these in my own studies, where they explain in their forums that Jews are like a tentacle, that like an octopus that has tons of tentacles, like homosexuality and abortions and vaccines and so on. Wild ideas that for many years were kept at the fringes of societies. These days, they make not only a comeback, but they move into mainstream discourse, leading to quite a lot of tragic outcomes that we're all familiar with, in part because they have moved to mainstream discourse. Now you hear the Great Replacement conspiracy theory on Fox News. You hear it on Breitbart. You hear it in the writings of Ann Coulter. You see it in Tucker Carlson, and you see it in political campaign messages by Republicans running for Congress. Again, not just the idea that America is changing, because America is changing demographically, but the idea that there is a mastermind behind it, maybe George Soros, maybe feminism that tries to replace white people with non-white people. An example for a person who doesn't pay a price for extremist misinformation is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, despite promoting the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, QAnon, the idea that Jews are causing fires with space lasers, I don't know, and so on, manages to get elected into Congress not once, but twice and quite easily. And then, of course, there is this guy. I tried my best not to talk too much about him until now, but Donald Trump is the epitome of not paying a price for deceptions and lies. And you know who knows it best? Donald Trump himself, who in 2016 told us, I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose a vote, okay? And he was right. Donald Trump, throughout his first presidency, spread, I don't know if you're ready for that number, about 31,000 falsehoods. You can do the math. That's a lot of falsehoods per day. There were actually days where he spread hundreds of falsehoods. And the number of falsehoods, I'm not saying lies here, I'm going to call them falsehoods, increased over time. If you want to know why I don't call it a lie, we can talk about it later. Did he lose voters because of those falsehoods? Absolutely not. He actually won the 2024 elections, not in a landslide in any way, but decisively. Not only that, Republicans trust Trump. They believe that he's trustworthy. They believe what he says about diseases more than the CDC. They believe his word about the elections more than officials. And some Republicans, quite a lot actually, say that they trust him more than friends and family members. I don't know. Money doesn't seem to trickle down, but misinformation does. And one of the effects of the Trump presidency is that we see a spread of this phenomenon to other countries. And if you try to make sense of the elections in France or Hungary or Israel or Italy, I think to a large degree, what characterizes the populist far right today is the understanding that they no longer pay political prices for lying, for deception, for falsehoods. Okay, last lesson, and we go to Q&A. There is no silver bullet. This is the depressing part, okay? Everything that I talked about until now was the fun part. Because now you're naturally going to ask me, what can we do? And the answer is it's complicated and most things just don't work. So before we can say what can we do, we need to decide who should fight misinformation. This is not an easy question. I mean, the government can fight misinformation. Some countries do it. In Germany, if you deny the Holocaust, you get a big fine. Do we want to do it here? Probably not. And also the First Amendment kind of makes it hard to achieve anyway. Again, I'm not a huge fan of censorship anyway, so that's fine by me. Educators like us maybe can find, and academics can fight misinformation. We can talk about that. Maybe journalists, maybe fact checkers, maybe social media companies like Zuckerberg and Elon Musk's of the world, and maybe citizens. I mean, maybe it's our personal responsibility to fight misinformation. If we decide that one of these is responsible, then the next question is how? Think about social media companies. If we think that Facebook should fight misinformation, there are many ways in which they can do it, and people seem to disagree about which is better than others. They can censor content, so if I'm spreading a conspiracy theory, they can just remove it. They can punish me, maybe block me for a while. They can completely deplatform me. That's what they did to Trump in 2021 when they deleted his account. They can downrank me, so maybe they don't remove me, but they move my crazy posts to the bottom of the feed. They can do fact checking. We know that Mark Zuckerberg just decided not to do that anymore. And they could label stuff. So they can say, this post has been labeled as problematic, and you guys do whatever you want with it. No clear solution and a lot of disagreement between experts, politicians, educators, and so on, and citizens on how to approach it. What about just correcting misinformation? I mean, if somebody says that the Holocaust didn't exist, didn't happen, can't we just tell them, yes, it did? Well, problem, it doesn't work. So going to someone who believes a misinformation and telling them you're wrong doesn't seem to work. We've been studying it for about 50, 60 years now. People just keep holding to the misinformation even after corrections. In fact, at some points, we even see a backfire effect. So when you go to people who believe that, let's say, Barack Obama is a Muslim, he's not, and you tell them, hey, he's Christian, we see in some studies that it actually makes them even more sure that he's a Muslim. Now they think that you, the educator, is part of the conspiracy. What works better than simple corrections are what we call enhanced corrections, but again, they do slightly better, but not great. Some try to correct with narratives, like instead of giving people facts, you give them stories, maybe tapping into people's emotions, maybe trying to understand the values and morality of your audience. That seems to work a little better. And some people try to pre-bunk. So instead of correcting misinformation, they try to kind of inoculate people ahead of time. Especially in Europe, there is quite a lot of research on that. All of these work a little bit, but not really. We see again and again in meta-analyses of multiple studies, misinformation persists. So what do I suggest doing? Well, I have a couple of solutions, but none of them is simple to do. Okay, I'm sorry. The first one is to repair our broken democratic institutions. I think that part of why misinformation succeeds so much these days is all kind of systematic inequalities in our society, the unhinged neoliberalism that we've accepted as a country and the world accepted as a whole in the Western sphere, at least since the 80s, which led to places where you can basically create unholy marriages between money and political power. Look at Wisconsin. There is a special election to the Supreme Courts today, and someone who I will not name is handing out checks for $1 million if you vote for their candidate. This should be fixed because this is opening the door to both polarization and misinformation. The second way I think we can fix the problem to a degree is building stronger journalism. Here again, there is an unholy marriage between mass media and advertisers. It's something that we started doing roughly in 1850 when the penny press was created. The idea that we're gonna create media that's relatively cheap, we're gonna sell it to as many audiences as possible, and then we'll go to advertisers and say, hey, I have 5 million readers to the New York Times or whatever. Do you want to put an advertisement for your refrigerator on the front page? It worked pretty well until, let's say, 2009. What happened in 2009 is a great recession that you may remember, with the rise of social media and the internet, basically breaking down the monopoly of mass media over advertising money. Now, pretty much all the advertising money in the world is going to either Facebook or Google, meaning that journalism is as vulnerable as ever, which means it's going to become even more sensationalist, less likely to hold account to power, and so on. If it stays open at all, because a lot of newspapers and TV channels are just closing down. Other big changes we can consider is legislation. Because of an esoteric section in the 1996 Telecommunication Acts, this is the Clinton era, social media companies today are not responsible for the content on their platforms. The idea behind it was if I develop telephone lines, let's say I'm AT&T, you cannot sue me if terrorists are conducting their nefarious plans over my phone lines. I just created technology. They are the ones using it nefariously. The same logic was used to create social media and the internet. Basically, even if I'm spreading misinformation on Facebook, you cannot sue Facebook. You can sue me, but you cannot sue Facebook. It's called Section 230. Interestingly enough, both parties, Republicans and Democrats, hate it, but they don't agree on how to change it. And you need to work across the aisle in a bipartisan way to change something like that. The last way that I know a lot of you believe in, if you're in this talk, is education. That includes increasing media literacy, giving our children better tools to identify and fight misinformation. I do like the educational path, but I think it's much more complicated than people realize. Let me give you an example. Who gets to decide what educators gonna teach your kids? Well, politicians at the end of the day. We see it these days with the cuts in Columbia and Harvard and so on. But also, if you want a vivid example, look at Florida, where Governor DeSantis basically took a university kind of as an experiment of sorts. It's called the New College in Sarasota. It's a small town, northwest coast. Took the college, fired all the board, replaced them with Republican yaysayers, and basically completely changed the curriculum, faculty, and everything that this college does. So when you say, I think the solution to misinformation is education, just remember that education is controlled by those in power. It's not like an amorphous independent. So I hope I persuaded you that it's not going to be easy to fight misinformation. But in my view, we don't really have a choice now, do we? Right? And things look pretty dark these days. But I love this line from Leonard Cohen, who told us that there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And somebody reminded me a few days ago of the inauguration speech where the poet said in 2021 that there is always a light if we are brave enough to see it, right? I want to open up the floor to Q&A. I think it would be interesting for us to think about how misinformation affects your work, the people in the Zoom, and importantly, how do you fight it? But also, if you want to ask anything else, I'm open for questions. So I think, Diane, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your beautiful faces.
And I know Michael has something he'd like to share.
Yes, right.
If you want to unmute.
Oh, sure. I appreciate the talk. Yeah, a little overwhelming now, I guess, in a good way. So I really appreciate what you laid
I
out.
tell my students who join my lab that all of them are going to go to therapists. I mean, for sure. That's a prerequisite of joining my team.
Yeah, yes. I guess my comment in the chat was more about, I sometimes go back to Rick Santorum when he was kind of debating with Obama about everyone going to college and what a snobby thing to say. I don't know if you remember that back in the early days of the Tea Party, but we have this deep anti-intellectual current in America. And for me, that's one of the hardest problems when it comes to this lack of trust. I grew up working class and was first generation, and my grandparents, who I lived with, had trust in the experts, their leaders, wanted everyone in the family to sort of keep moving forward in terms of their education. And clearly that's been lost, and there's probably a million factors we could talk about. But I guess that's kind of my comment that I wanted to throw out there and see where you're at with that.
I think that you are absolutely right that we are going through a new wave or version of anti-intellectualism, but I would argue that it's not as new as we think. Richard Hofstadter wrote a book in 1964 on anti-intellectualism in America, in which he kind of blamed the Goldwater slash even Eisenhower kind of era for a rise in anti-intellectualism on the right. If I remember correctly, William Buckley Jr. published a book in 1950 something, 52 or something, called something Yale versus God or something like that. Anti-intellectualism goes back quite a lot. Well, Alexis de Tocqueville said that what was so interesting about America 200 years ago is that in America, everyone is an expert to themselves, right? Having said that, what we see in the data, and actually a friend of mine, I don't know, I have a bunch of books here, but not the right one. A friend of mine was studying anti-intellectualism for a few years now, and he created the figure that I showed you before. Basically, there was a big gap between Republican and Democratic elites on perceptions of science and anti-intellectualism. But only in 2010, after the Tea Party, do we see that spilling over into the public itself. So even though Goldwater and Nixon and Reagan and many others have said things that diverted quite strikingly from science over the years, like Reagan said in the 80s that the ozone layer is harmed by mountains and not by cars, right? Which was definitely not in line with the science of the ozone, but also it didn't affect his voters so much. They kept believing the scientists, as you said. In 2010, something snaps. Again, a new political moment, a new information environment, now, rife with the Rush Limbaughs of the world and the Fox Newses and the internet and whatnot. Heavy deregulation that made it harder for citizens to get high quality news and information. And a breakaway from political norms that kind of survived America all the way to, let's say, 1990. I think with Newt Gingrich, this is where the decline, I think, in compliance with norms begins to raise up its head. So I'm not just name dropping a lot of people here that probably were more important before I was born than they are now, but I'm trying to demonstrate kind of very kind of quick and dirty that the problem is not new.
Yes.
But I think something in 1990, the Gingrich Revolution, in my book, I argue that the Gingrich Revolution succeeded more than he thought at the time. It's not only bringing an end to the Democratic, dominance in Congress, but changing the interaction between culture wars and politics, culture wars and expertise. Everything now is God, guns, and gays, right? And it kind of spills over into everything. And not trusting scientists is now a litmus test of sorts for being in that basket, in that mega identity known as a Republican in 2024. I truly hope that it's going to change. And one thing that it's really important for me to say, you know what, I'm kind of regretting not saying it ahead of time, but there is nothing about misinformation that's inherently left or right. I should have mentioned it earlier and be very clear about it. Democrats and liberals are capable of believing conspiracy theories. They have before. In fact, the 9/11 stuff was more popular on the left than the right. But at the current moment, because of the way Republican and right-leaning elites behave, and especially don't behave in light of deception, we have a very, very concerning asymmetry in America. And it's not my opinion, it's the empirical evidence that is overwhelming across methods and scholars and universities and studies. And also outside of the United States, in Germany, in Canada, in other places. Currently, at the moment, the problem is more severe on the right than on the left. But it can change. I'm completely open to the flexibility of that.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was a long answer, but
No, I appreciate it.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Well, I have one other comment.
ahead.
I know we're over time. I am hopeful in the sense.
No, we have time, no worries.
Oh, we do. Okay. So I guess I'm hopeful in one sense. To me, it's all about marketing. I study how the pharmaceutical industry markets, and they're really adept at what we say, finding the right facts to tell the right story. And I think that happens on both the left and the right. When it comes to science, science does try to get at the correct facts to tell the story versus the right facts. But I see a populace, it doesn't matter what side, left,
Yeah.
if you left, right, that has the critical thinking skills.
Oh, yeah.
People are putting together conspiracy theories based on facts that they're pulling. And I'm saying, facts in quotes. So the critical thinking is there, but we really are at just a nexus point where, there's a lot of different things converging that you've outlined that I think we're just at a very dangerous time. And I'll just say, as an anthropologist, I just read that the Trump administration is refuting the notion that race is a social construct
Sure.
and trying to hedge it that we want to get back to sort of this scientific racism, and I'm just really concerned about that. It's a
So
revisionist science that's happening out there now, not
it,
just history.
it may sound outrageous to you that Republicans are saying this, but if you would have listened to Jordan Peterson for the last 10 years and his very popular podcast, he says it all the time. He says hierarchy is natural in nature. There are always better races and better genders and better, not genders, sexes and so on. So again, it's this far right ideas that did really well on the fringes that now become somehow normal in the mainstream politics. That's very worrying. I mean, worrisome. Uh, two comments. No, one comment about what you said about pharmaceuticals. Yes, pharmaceuticals is a good example for a place where a lot of the misinformation over the last 20 years or so tended to come from the left. I have a study that I show my students that talks about conspiracy theories, and they call the MMR autism hypothesis, they call it a democratic liberal conspiracy theory, right? And this is from 2019. So it's not like ancient times. I'm talking a moment before the pandemic. And I do have the right book next to me. Things are even worse when it comes to not my book this time around, but when it comes to alternative medicine. The level of conspiratorial thinking and whatnot had been much higher on the left. But, and this is an important one, things are changing now even there. So since 2020, it began in COVID, even alternative medicine kind of conspiracy theories that used to belong to the kind of oat milk moms of California are now making a move towards the right wing of American society. Take the flu vaccine in 2019, zero difference between Republicans and Democrats. Now, about 25-30% difference. Everything that has to do with alternative medicine, chiropractic, I don't know, supplements, it all begins to move more and more to the right. So what happens here is that we polarize as a society to a place where people are kind of, finding themselves in those massive mega identities again. And one of the attractions of these mega identities is being a conspiracy theorist. And if you don't believe the official explanation about JFK or about 9/11, there is a good chance you're not going to believe the pharmaceuticals too. So the more conspiracy theories will flourish on the right, the less the party is able to fight back, either from within, think about Liz Cheney, or from outside, think about Fox News, the more it will attract conspiracy theories from the left. So even pharmaceutical conspiracies. I gave a talk about something similar to today's talk in the University of Pennsylvania a couple of months ago to the group that developed the mRNA vaccine. And they were flabbergasted by the amount of resistance, especially coming from the right. They knew that there are pockets of resistance on the left, but now every scientific innovation is suspected as being part of the New World Order, I don't know, conspiracy theory. I am definitely part of the New World Order, if you ask conspiracy theorists.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question or comment you'd like to share?
Yeah, you
This
can
has
ask
been-
questions. They're paying me the same if I stay until 5:30, which is nothing.
Oh, yeah, it's coming out of my divisional budget. This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I hope you get enough airtime to share these ideas and thoughts more widely. People outside UB need to hear it too. It's been phenomenal.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you.
It was wonderful.
Excellent.
Bye. Have a good night.